Hello, I'm Heather Horton, she, her, hers, Director of the Wellness Resource Center at Colorado College. And I'm joined today by my WRC colleagues, Isa Trujillo, Montana Bass, Anna Thompson, and Chris Walters. And we've also got a special guest who we'll introduce in just a moment. We're really excited to be here for our third Thursday Night Live broadcast. If you've joined us before, then you're familiar maybe with what we're trying to do here. But if you're joining us for the first time, this broadcast is a weekly dynamic digital gathering with WRC staff, and it's designed to be a chance to process the current moment, share some strategies for navigating remote learning and working, and reflecting on recent and upcoming wellness programming. We would like this live broadcast to be as close to interacting with us in person as possible, so we really encourage you to engage with us. We'll be following the chat, and so hope that you chime in with your ideas, reactions, and questions as we go along. Also, it is our expectation for our interaction with you is the same as when we're on campus together. So we ask for people to be respectful, thoughtful, compassionate, and trauma-informed in both our language and our actions. So each week on Thursday Night Live, we're engaging with a particular theme. We're talking about this moment of social distancing in the context of our B.A.D.A.S.S active bystander intervention campaign. And we're really fortunate today to be joined by our old friend and colleague, former CC colleague, Maria Mendez. Welcome, Maria.
Hi, thank you. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what you're doing now?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am the Training and Technical Assistance Manager with CCASA, the Colorado Coalition Against Sexual Assault. It is based out of Denver, but we provide support to member agencies. We are a membership agency where folks who are doing the work around the state, like CC, other college campuses, sexual assault programs. We work with judicial systems, a variety of different people. And what we do is we help provide support, training, policy, advocacy at the state capitol level. One of my colleagues does that really, really well. And so that's just kind of some of the things that we do, me particularly, if you've ever been on a CCASA webinar. And Heather actually hosted a webinar at the beginning of the month. You've heard my voice. I help facilitate those and set those up as far as depending on what people around the state, what our members are needing and asking for. And I've been there for about a year and a half now. So that's a little bit about me, a little bit about CCASA and the work that we're doing.
Thank you. Yeah, and it's great to have you here during Sexual Assault Awareness Month. So. And as I'm sure you remember, Maria, the first part of our B.A.D.A.S.S active bystander intervention campaign is about being aware of the challenges and harms that the people around us might be experiencing. And as our community has dispersed around the globe, we have really been thinking a lot about the challenges that this remote COVID-19 distant world might be presenting for members of our community. And Montana, do you want to take it from here?
Sure, I will. And just give me like a chat message or something if it seems like I'm not really coming through, because I know I've been having some internet issues. But we were interested in talking about, well, so our Be Aware section typically talks about the ways that systems of oppression, substance use, and mental health all intersect to create potential for harm in our communities. And there are some really specific ways that in this moment during the pandemic where we're all in quarantine, those different areas of focus for us are intersecting in new ways that are specific to this moment. I know in our Thursday Night Live last week with Debbie Howell, our campus elder in residence, we discussed some of the ways that COVID was affecting Native communities in our country specifically harshly, and the fact that our African American communities are also experiencing higher rates of the infection and of having serious and possibly fatal cases of coronavirus. And another thing that we've been talking about in our office, and Maria, we would love to get your input on, is the way that this pandemic is presenting particular challenges for survivors of sexual violence and people who might be quarantined and in intimate partner, abusive intimate partner relationships.
Yeah, so we're definitely seeing it an increase, right? Particularly with intimate partner violence, where folks are now in spaces that they are quarantined with potentially the abuser, right? So we're thinking about intimate partner violence, we're thinking about child sexual abuse, we're thinking about sexual violence in particular, when that is a form that a partner, that is a form of abuse that a partner is doing. We're thinking about survivors where isolation is not necessarily something that is helpful for the healing process, right? So we've been working a lot with our programs and being able to provide that connectedness still through a variety of different ways, whether that be through the phone, whether that be through things like WebEx, while still maintaining confidentiality, while maintaining HIPAA, while maintaining B.A.D.A.S. requirements for that confidentiality. So we do have quite a bit of resources. We actually hosted a webinar not too long ago about telecounseling. And thinking about things like doxing me, and even being able to be in a space where there's a survivor, but the people at home or in their home aren't very supportive. And so having those opportunities to have those conversations with an advocate or with a counselor aren't necessarily very feasible, because they don't have a space to retreat to have a therapy session or to have a conversation, to call a hotline. We're seeing that play out in terms of, down in Colorado Springs, Memorial Hospital is still having the in-person forensic exams. They're still allowing folks to come in and be an advocate. They're very much advocating for that. However, that's not the case across the state or across states, right? So there's a limitation in seeking services in that way. And again, we're just trying to find ways to connect people, to give some resources. There's some toolkits that some coalitions and other agencies are putting out for self-care, for ways to do that without necessarily needing to talk to a therapist because it's not accessible, right? So those are kind of some of the ways that we're seeing it impact survivors.
Thank you. Yeah, and I mean, we've been talking a lot about more within the realm of, wait a minute, for some reason from my view, it looks like I'm interrupting, but I can't tell if I am.
Go ahead, Montana. We're listening.
Montana.
Okay, sorry, everyone. So what I was going to say is just that we're definitely in our office kind of trying to brainstorm ways that, similarly to like, I guess those toolkits, we can provide some sort of like passive programming or things that are easy to tap into that maybe don't require survivors to be engaging, like in ways that would require them to like talk or show up or participate. Because like you mentioned, it can be really hard to connect with the supports that people might when they're not in quarantine, just because if their home space not being supportive. And that's something I know I'm thinking about with the people in my life and the students that I support a lot, because even spaces that aren't necessarily like being able to call a therapist or being able to, go to the SARC's office, there's all sorts of ways that we find connection and support and healing just through our communities and the people that we see and the things that they say. So I think just being aware of like how the environments that certain people are in may or may not be conducive to their healing or might be re-traumatizing or potentially abusive is really important in this time. And another thing I wanted to bring up in our kind of be aware section that of course intersects with survivors of sexual violence and of any kind of systemic oppression is people who might be experiencing challenges related to recovery and substance use in this specific moment. Chris, do you want to jump in on that, or actually, or anyone from our office, if you want to jump in on that intersection?
Yeah,
Sorry, go ahead, Isa. My face is actually not on the live stream, so I'm this headless, faceless voice coming through.
Like the Wizard of Oz. Isn't that the movie?
Yeah. But sure, I can talk a little bit about that, and then I'll pass it off to Isa. But yeah, and I think we also touched last week on how difficult it can be to see a lot of people choosing to use substances as coping mechanisms with a lot of the challenges and stressors people are facing, increasingly so, I think, over the past couple weeks. And I think what's so important for people in recovery is maintaining that sense of connection and feeling still like they're part of a larger recovery community and recovery network. So I think being aware that those people might want to be reached out to more often, especially in this time, and could use maybe some checking in with is pretty important when we're talking about being aware. And then also offering your support as well in whatever form that person needs, or whatever form is possible, with us being quarantined in our own homes and separate. But I think the best thing that you can do is kind of just check in with people, talk with people regularly, and make sure they're getting the support that they need from you. And I'll pass it to Isa.
Yeah, thanks for that, Chris, as always. I was thinking kind of, Montana, about your point in a bit of a different lens, but still thinking about community in the sense that Montana, I feel like you said this last live, that you can just hear what I'm saying in my voice, and now I hear what you're saying in your voice, that there's this Facebook group that I'm a part of called the 411 for the 719, and it's a community group, and there's a lot of folks post things, and it's pretty active. And in our last live session, Chris shared an app for folks in recovery, and I thought about posting it in this community group because I'm like, I know we're all at home, and I know folks struggle in our community, and like, yeah, this is information that should be shared. But then I kind of weighed, well, do I want to open up myself to being trolled? Because that is what happens in that group too, what happens in that group sometimes. And it can just be, really tricky being online and wanting to like support folks. And that's why I feel like, back to your point, Chris, of like going one-to-one with somebody, I think is a really accessible place to start, of like, hey, I know you, how are you doing? Let me talk to you real quick and I can support. And that's my sphere of influence for right now, that I support you one-to-one to the best of my ability. But since I'm here unmuted still, I'll kind of move us through to our next kind of section within the Be Aware category, or thinking about being aware in this moment. And that is the very real reality that Asian Americans and Asian people living in America and outside of America are experiencing harassment and unprecedented, really, racial violence across many spectrums and forms, and across many kind of forms of violence, from physical violence to verbal harassment in the streets. And I posted an article earlier to our page from the New York Times, and the author of that article really, I think, does a very, unfortunately, clear job of outlining the very many instances of racism against, racial violence against, inflicted against Asian Americans. And I would encourage anyone who is either doubtful that this is happening or wanting to continually educate themselves in kind of the badass fashion of like, where are the places where I can be aware what's happening, what's going on in my community, in the world. But I kind of want to open us up then to a conversation about how does harassment manifest online, and how does our being, in our homes and mostly connected through the internet then open up new channels for harassment and racialized violence and gendered violence, and some of the things that we're beginning to see. And what does it mean to be aware of that? Well, I'll leave us with that question for anybody, especially Maria, though, as our guest. Please chime in.
Well, I think, Isa, that what you were saying, even about considering posting in the 411 for the 719 group, like really speaks volumes to that. I think just like being engaged through the internet, where things are kind of immortal once you put them out there, puts a little bit of a different set of considerations on when possibly intervening. I think it can make people take a little bit more of a defensive stance in some ways, because of the fact that, like, when you put anything out on the internet, especially things that are subjects that people have really strong reactions towards, you're opening yourself up potentially to getting trolled and whatever. But then I also think there's other ways that, like, the internet kind of lowers the bar, because there is that physical distance, and it might empower people to make a connection or say something in situations where, like, they would feel intimidated what if it were in person.
Yeah, Montana, I really agree with that in terms of, like, there's a level of anonymity that, even though on our profiles we might have our picture and people might have access to our profile, but being behind a keyboard without really seeing who that person is, or them being able to see who we are, opens us up to feeling a little bit more comfortable, or for some other folks, a little less comfortable to reach out and say, hey, I really need help here, or here's a really great resource, because of the anonymous factor. I also think, one of the things that we've been seeing and talking about quite a bit at CC is Zoom bombing, right? That's been coming up when we've been talking to folks about, okay, how can you have these conversations? How can you continue to do prevention? How can you continue to have different programs for the community, whether that's campus or broader community? And the fact that people are harassing in ways of coming in and showing pornography randomly, or writing racial slurs. That's one of the first Zoom bombings that I heard of, right? Where somebody was defending their dissertation, and somebody came in and started writing, on the board, different racial slurs, and then coming in with, again, with pornography and things like that. And so thinking how people have become emboldened to do that, because there isn't a face to that, at least for them. And then for us to be able to not only be aware that that's happening and on which platforms, but also being aware of, okay, how can I not how can I guard against this? What are some of the safe measures that I can do? And how can I support people? Then what would be the best way to support someone if this happens in the space that I'm in? So
I'm also really mindful of the ways in which sort of the standard media environment and social media environment can be experienced as harassing because of the kinds of things that are normalized in our society. And like a lot of the memes that I'm seeing related to the COVID crisis do things that diminish the real lived experience of people, say, with mental illness, who are struggling with suicidality, all of those kinds of things. It makes people feel like, oh, people think this is a joke. And that's even more isolating. And I think that survivors of sexual violence feel that, on a daily basis, all the time, COVID aside, right? But the isolation maybe is increasing that sense of being alone in things in our worldviews, or not having those kinds of supports. And I'm curious what folks' thoughts are about how that normal environment that we've been living in, digital world, is intersecting with and maybe offering some gifts, because I've seen some compassion and some beautiful things out there too, but also maybe making things more challenging for folks.
I think you all had planned to talk about this a little bit more in terms of boundaries and the consent aspect of it, where a lot of times in the digital space, our boundaries are very much blurred, right? Of thinking about, we sleep with our phone next to our pillow or on the bedside table, and maybe we don't shut it off, and it buzzes us awake. And here we are now looking at this comment that may be harassing, that may be something that makes me feel isolated, and anytime, right? Regardless of whether we're quarantined or in physical or social distancing, that we've already had those blurs and boundaries of being hyper connected to everything. And with this, that this is now our main source of connectedness, I think blurs it even more in terms of, okay, when is the start of my workday? When is the start of my class? When is the end of my class? How am I interacting with my peers? How am I doing that? And feeling like, because it's so sparse in between and so random, that I have to respond at every and which moment. So I think that aspect has been heightened. And so we need to be aware of that and decide how we're going to be setting some of those boundaries for ourselves and helping others set those boundaries for themselves too.
Issa, did you have something?
Honestly, I think I was listening a little too actively to Maria. My point is gone, and I don't remember what I was going to say. But I really just second everything that you said. And honestly, what I was thinking about was a question that I've been wanting to ask kind of for a while, especially in the national webinar type settings, in the higher ed setting in particular, or how are people kind of balancing, if social media is a big part of your day-to-day, or kind of your how you're interacting with students, or just what you're doing. I personally am finding that I don't really engage personally. I don't really enjoy it very much anymore, or I do a little less. that's kind of the balance that I've struck, that I just do a little less of my personal social media-ing and, think of things through a work lens. I'm looking at my timeline for things that are good for work. Oh, this article is good. I'm combing through. And it's become kind of like a bit of a routine, and the connection piece is definitely lacking on like my end. So I think also when I think about being aware of kind of my presence, I'm also thinking about like, what's my state of mind? How do I know what I'm feeling is what I'm feeling? Do I feel kind of when I'm done closing my phone like that? In the same way, I think that would cue to me that a relationship with someone could maybe use some thinking, some critical examining. I'm hyper aware of that with my digital relationship right now, my digital relationship broadly defined.
Well, I know I've seen a few great resources out there. I don't know. Hopefully, our audience, if you're not familiar with the organization Hollaback, HOLLABACK exclamation point, I think. They have been doing awesome work around trying to end street harassment for years. And they have put out some trainings for trying to reduce racist and xenophobic harassment. And I know they've had thousands of people who have already participated in those, and they had to open up more trainings and raise money to do that. So that's a great resource. And the National Sexual Violence Resource Center has a ton of information that we can use to educate ourselves and increase our awareness of what to look for and how to act. Resources like Mental Health First Aid USA and some others. And we'll make sure that we get some links, because I know Maria sent us maybe in our chat some links. We'll either get those posted into the chat for our Facebook Live event, or we'll make sure to post those tomorrow. So check back in our Facebook feed for those. So I'm watching time. I feel like we could talk all evening, y'all, about being aware and talking about what's happening for people. But I also do want to move us on to sort of thinking about what goes into deciding to take action, because we've all sort of alluded to noticing things and then making decisions, and sometimes having some challenges around that, like Issa was sharing about trolls and things like that. And one thing that we were talking about in our office was that when we're all on campus together, and very much so when we do B.A.D.A.S.S trainings, we talk about how we have these shared values that sort of bind us together as a community. And so we were kind of looking at that and saying, gosh, do we still have shared values now that we're sort of all dispersed? And so certainly if you're watching us right now, put into the chat if you believe that we do have shared values and what those values might be. But curious to hear from my lovely colleagues about that too.
If I can jump in real quick, I was thinking a lot about just before actually we went live, how I wish we could have this live again, because when I think about community, I think a lot about where we are, and therefore, if I'm thinking about where we are, that is also informs our values. And so I'm wondering if being physically together on the campus, seeing the same things every day, had any role in really reinforcing what's important to us. And I wonder then, how might we capitalize on like being in different environments, having, our daily view look a little different than it used to? How do we use what's around us to really fortify our values and really maintain a connection to our shared values, given, differences in location? Because like they say in real estate, location. I think location might be really one of the biggest kind of factors impacting how students are feeling, and everyone obviously, but students in particular, I'm thinking about you all, how y'all are feeling and doing in this moment. I just graduated. Like, I feel like this could have, you know, I could have been a student navigating this experience. And back to resilience, last week's theme, like I don't think I said this yet then, but like every single enrolled student right now, y'all are exemplifying resilience in a way that I hope you're really acknowledging for yourselves. So that's kind of my 2 cents on the values piece. It's like, metaphorically, where are our values, and physically, where do we feel them? Where do we touch them? Where do we sit in them?
I was gonna just chime in metaphorically. Yeah, so they do exist, but I think like this feeling of connection and shared values is depending on the individual's like deliberateness and staying connected, which is interesting because on CC's campus, there's some kids that can be like really, really not involved and not do anything, but it's just a small campus, and just like by being present and going to class, they're still like in the community. But I imagine those same students off back at their own local communities are definitely not feeling the connectedness because I think it requires like deliberate seeking out connection and like staying in touch with your school and so on. And then of course, I think like longevity on campus matters. Like I think there's a lot of freshmen who are just kind of getting their footing, maybe exploring new identities, and then are thrown back to their local communities, which may not have, depending on where they're coming from, maybe don't share CC's values. And so they're kind of, they might be feeling pretty stuck right now, I think. And again, to connect to their community, they have to really be conscious in doing that.
Yeah, I mean, I really appreciate that, those 2 levels of Isa, how you mentioned, I just graduated, and your sense of value and identity as an alum, right? Versus Anna, how you were talking about folks that are just coming into this community as first years, because that's really, really important. I was thinking about in this question, I'm a Tar Heel born and bred, right? And what exactly does that mean, right? That there's a sense of value of, you know, things like logos, my cup that I have, my car, I named her Carolina, right? So like these different things that are those values, that are that connectedness, in the same way that, you know, alumnus, alumni, grammar, what is it? And so the way that folks who have graduated still feel a sense of connectedness and a sense of, this is who I am, this is part of my identity, I think can help us in this particular stage of thinking of ourselves as like ambassadors of a place, of a location, right? Where I can picture what it's like being on the CC campus. I can imagine walking through Werner, right? I can imagine when it's not snowing outside that I'm laying out on a hammock on a gorgeous spring day, right? I can imagine that in the people that I'm with, and the sense of, you know what, I'm a CC Tiger, like that's who I am, so that it helps kind of bring back that community and connect in virtual spaces like these, right? With people, with staff, with faculty, with other students, with the other alum, so that if we're not finding that in the community that we're in, that is different, that might be different, and oftentimes we do hear that a lot, that the CC community is very different from home community, of how we're going to bring those values into that space. And again, yeah, for seniors, for juniors, even sometimes some sophomores are able to do that. We hear that whenever they would go home for fall break, right? Whenever folks would come home for any block breaks or any family gatherings or things like that, of wow, it was so different. It was really weird being back home. And this is how I kind of brought it back. I brought it together. This is kind of how I'm reframing the way that I think and how I'm bringing those values to my home space. And so potentially thinking about ways that we can do that are going to be binding us together as CC Tigers.
Definitely. And to kind of just build on really this great conversation, I would like to draw, if folks haven't seen in our comment section, Chaplain Kate Holbrook commented, as a paradox, perhaps we have the opportunity to intentionally articulate what we value in this moment and even clarify them as community or as a community or communities. And I just think that is exact spot on with what we're talking about, that like, you know what, we can take control of this moment. We can be really clear about what's important. And that's a gift in my book, to me.
Something that I've been seeing on social media a fair amount that I think has been a positive engagement is like people making lists of things that they have in the pandemic that they would like to like bring forward, like new habits they've been developing that they would like to bring forward once we're not in quarantine anymore, and things that they miss from like life pre-quarantine that they're like really excited to get back to, and then also things from the pre-quarantine, I guess, like from normal life that they're wanting to leave behind and stay there. And I think that like I think that I like push back a little bit on the idea that there's going to be some clear boundary of like pre-quarantine and post-quarantine. But I do think that engagement with like using this as an opportunity to really look at our habits and our daily practices and make some intentional decisions there, kind of create the boundaries that Maria was talking about earlier. It's a really good opportunity to be doing those things. And that also makes me think about the ways, like going back to kind of substance use during this time, the ways that we're engaging with alcohol. I know that like Isa, you and I had a conversation right when we went to shelter in place about kind of just like the decisions around keeping liquor stores and dispensaries open as an essential business, and kind of thinking about like what does that mean for our communities and our relationship to those substances, and like, you know, maybe this should be the moment to just really be thinking critically on like what does that mean for us to need that as an essential business. Yeah, and I don't know, I'll stop there.
Anna, it looked like you had something you to say.
Really nothing new after Montana and so on. I just think there's a lot of routes you can go when you're thinking about the current moment and the future. And there's it's easy to go nihilistic and like totally just like whatever and give into all your worst impulses to get through. But then that doesn't really leave any room, like what's going to happen when this is, well, over, more or less. But on the other hand, it offers this new time to imagine what we want, reimagine the community. So that's all I was going to add. And like Montana said, individual, like on a multiple basis, like individually, like your new habits you want to bring in, but also ways we're interacting interpersonally and as a community. We spoke in our last session. I think we kind of talked about we're seeing a little bit more compassion and empathy, and hopefully that is something that will extend into the future. So I do think this is a good time to start reimagining things on multiple counts. You know, people like in a lot of different ways, like when we're thinking about labor, and I know this is getting away from the topic, but people are realizing, you know, what's needed. Like the real heroes are like these working class, low wage earners. They're literally the ones that keep society going. No one notices the CEO is quarantined because he doesn't actually create his own wealth. So, but I'm just thinking, like, I think a lot of people are also having these huge realizations during this time, like seeing like what exactly keeps society running too, which I think is good for people to realize, like the people that actually need to be paid more. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think I would add to that. I mean, I think it's fair to, if we have the capacity to think about what the future looks like and the habits that I want to leave behind, that's great. And also not to be hard on ourselves if we can't do that at this time, right? Because sometimes for some people, it's just about survival, right? Just about getting through, okay, for students, right? How am I even gonna focus on reading this or writing this paper or, engaging in this discussion when, I might have a parent or a guardian or a sibling or someone really close to me who is one of those essential workers who is going out and being endangered from day to day, or I am an essential worker and on top of going to school, now that I'm home, I have to, go and be at a grocery store or I'm studying, all of these different scenarios that might be happening. So again, reminding us to be gentle with ourselves, to be gentle with others, and that this might not be a time for reinvention for us, that it's just about I'm living it day by day and we'll see what happens. So naming that.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of romanticization going on in the COVID around this. And I definitely see it. It's more like you're definitely privileged if you're able to do that. I'm hearing stories from back in New York, like for instance, in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, which has been gentrified and like a lot of rich people live there now. They've started doing this thing where they come out on their balconies at a certain time of night and like clap and stuff for like all the essential workers. And like my friends described a scene where these people come out on their balconies. It looks like they're kind of just like clapping for each other and stuff. Like, they're up in their high rises while all the like delivery people and workers below have their headphones on and are just milling about and not noticing the thing happening. So it's interesting to, there's a certain source of this romanticization of being quarantined coming from certain groups of people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
but that ties in. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Heather.
I was going to say that ties in with one of the things we talk about a lot in B.A.D.A.S.S trainings, right? Which is that we need to be aware of the things that other people are experiencing. And like, some of those folks on their balconies think they're being like really aware, but are they really being aware of what those people's experiences are, right? And really thinking about what's important to them, and just coming out on your balcony and clapping for them really make them feel valued? Or is there something that's actually much more meaningful than that would be a way to engage? And that's being a badass too, right? And then also self-awareness. That I totally hear you, Maria. There are lots of people who are surviving right now and do not have a lot of time to be sitting and reflecting on like, what are my values, or who do I want to be, or those kinds of things. But certainly for those of us who do have the privilege of that kind of time, that we need to be doing that, and that's part of what might drive us to take action in situations, right? Like if we've actually reflected on what's important to me, what's important to my community, then when I see something, I'm going to weigh this decision about taking action in terms of like what's at stake, right? Like I certainly might think about my physical safety. I might think about my emotional safety in trolling. But I'm also going to think about, I got to look at myself in the mirror. And so my values there become important to me in terms of that decision to take action. And Maria, thank you for the cue about compassion and self-compassion, because that's definitely one of the things that we've been talking about, both in preparing for this tonight, but also in general. And it's kind of like, the trite example of the airline oxygen mask, right? We can only be helpful to someone else if we've actually helped ourselves and cared for ourselves. And so that self-awareness of like, what do I need? What's gonna sustain me and help me survive in this moment is really an important part of this big picture too. Would love to move us along though to talk about some of the ways that we might take action in this kind of moment of being disconnected in physical proximity from one another. And one of the things we were talking about in our office was this continuum of action that's available to us, right? From, liking a post or commenting to someone about their behavior being hurtful, or big kinds of things. Montana and Anna, do you all want to talk at all about the opportunities that our Take Back the Night program this year might offer people to take action?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about that. Although we don't have the email thread live yet, I think that will be happening tomorrow. But typically, Take Back the Night is a march that then culminates in a survivor speak out. It's an opportunity to express solidarity with survivors of sexualized violence and demand an end to sexual violence. So it's really about witnessing those kind of experiences and coming out in community support and vocalizing need for change. Obviously, we can't gather in March this year, so we've been doing a lot of work with our student leaders whose student groups are specifically focused in those areas, or actually have had a few people join in too who are just more interested in being involved. And what we'll be doing is creating kind of an ongoing video archive that can march through this time that we are in quarantine. And we will just be asking people to submit videos of themselves, answering a few prompts. They're like, why does Take Back the Night matter to you? What are your personal commitments to helping end sexual violence? Or what messages do you have for survivors? So we're hoping that we can get a lot of the campus and broader community to contribute to that, just as a means of showing that that support is still there, that that value is still felt by our broad and dispersed community. And yeah, showing a message of support for people who might be really needing it in this moment, especially where April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. So typically this is a time where we really make an effort to heighten our attention to this issue. And obviously there's things that are kind of taking some precedent right now, which is understandable. But yeah.
And then, yeah, further next week, I'm doing my how to support how to help or support a survivor Tuesday afternoon. I'm doing that. And then I think we've only briefly discussed it in WRC, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be super easy to do Denim Day on the 29th. That's coming up where, I hope my jeans still fit, but I can take a picture of, it's an easy way to show solidarity with survivors, especially on social media. So, yeah.
And Maria, we were hoping that you might be able to talk with us a little bit about some of the policy work that CCASA does and ways that people might be able to say something and take action on policy issues.
Yeah, for sure. So I don't know if most people know, but at least here in Colorado, the ledge session is on pause. And we're, from what I hear from my colleague, the director of policy, they're going to look at potentially coming back kind of mid-May. So there are going to be policy issues and bills that CCASA has kind of on the floor. So visit our website, CCASA. We have a tab for policy work and kind of get updates on what are the bills we're working on. And when I say we, I mean our director of policy and our policy team. Kind of thinking, one of the things we're thinking of and we're hoping for is to remove statute of limitations, which again, that's on pause. One of the things that we really have our eye on right now, we had a full, really long meeting this morning about the changes that might be coming through the Department of Education. So as you all may recall, there was a notice and comment period. And so now we're just waiting for the final rule to come out. And so CCASA will be responding to that, providing technical assistance about what that means for college campuses. And so there's still lots of ways for folks to be involved with that in terms of, kind of just letting us know what's going on with that, what the impact is, and then certainly with the statute of limitations and the other bills that we have on the floor. There's opportunities for testimony. We're not sure what that's going to look like with all of with this whole pandemic, but we do have a survivor task force that folks, whether they identify as survivors or not, can join that survivor task force and help us with testimony at the Capitol for different bills that come up during legislative session, can help with when reporters are looking for information or they would like to speak to someone. We put that out to our survivor task force, help with any of our materials and things like that. So there are definitely ways to be engaged with sharing your voice through our survivor task force and in other ways through CCASA and that, particularly that policy work. So we hope that you all engage with us. We certainly love to hear from you all. Again, we're a membership agency, so the things that we do are based on what our members and what people around the state tell us that they're needing and wanting. So we would really love to hear from you of ways that we can do the work together. So we also are having Denim Day. Follow us on our social media. We're doing everything virtually again, like you all are doing. And so we have our Facebook page, we have an Instagram, we have a Twitter as well. I think we recently got a TikTok. So look for us on all of these places to be involved.
Awesome. As we were talking as a team before this broadcast, one of the things in terms of the continuum of action, we really wanted to put out there, there's so many different ways that people can be engaged as badass active bystanders that help to create social change. And I want to make sure we don't have a ton of time. So maybe I think Isa and Maria maybe talked about this, but to give a shout out to the way that artists can contribute to this social change.
Definitely. Shout out to Bad Bunny. Yo haga lo que me da la gana. That's a masterpiece of an album. But specifically, he released a song called Yo Perreo Sola, and Maria and I had a really good, affirming conversation for me about the fact that there are masculine identified folks out there with a platform who really care about gender-based violence. And he, in this music video, you can find it on YouTube, in a lot of different ways that we could honestly spend a whole other episode kind of discussing, and I would, but he in a lot of ways really pushes back on the kind of machismo that is like so rampant in like reggaeton music, and he uses visuals and text that stand with survivors of gender-based violence in Latin America and affirm like a person's right to like perrear sola, like I can dance alone and that's okay, and to like say that with a national platform, I mean that, you know, that speaks volumes to me. So I'm appreciating work like that that's really giving me something to dance to, stay active, and like get my blood going during this time, but also remind me that like good things are still happening. It's not all doom and gloom. And when I'm thinking about like deciding to act, that kind of positive, optimistic lens of like, hey, if I do something good, really good could happen from this. That's definitely on my mind. But yeah, shout out to Bad Bunny. He's not perfect. I'm not endorsing him in that way, but like he did this good thing and that deserves being shouted out, in my opinion.
For sure. Conejo malo, right? I just wanted to read at the end of that music video that you're talking about, Isa. We talked about this too, and I made sure I had it up so that I could share it. At the very end of the music video, there's this text that says, si no quiere bailar contigo, respeta, ella perrea sola. So if she doesn't want to dance with you, respect it. She wants to dance alone. Right. So like, again, that huge platform of at the end of this music video where he's challenging masculine norms and masculinity with, again, he said what you were talking about with like the machismo and the way that particularly in Latinx culture as well of, no, I'm strong, I'm manly. And we see that in across the board cultures. But the fact that he's doing that and is using that platform to, at the very end, the last thing that I want to leave you with, not only is my song called Perreo Sola, I'm going to tell you and remind you, respect that I want to do that because I'm doing this for me. I'm not doing this for you. So that's really, really neat.
Mm-hmm. I couldn't agree more. And as we are winding down, I will just kind of offer this as a real world example of like what we're talking about. My friend and I who like have listened to Bad Bunny's album, like just literally on repeat. That's all we're listening to. She was telling me that a person who was featured, like another masculine identified artist who was featured on his album, actually Anuel A.A. like made kind of homophobic comments about Bad Bunny in that music video because he's challenging machismo like through dress and gesture, and like this person who he kind of had this solidarity with, like through the music, is actually like, I don't like that, or like kind of pushing back so that even we can see in real time that like solidarity is functioning in a very particular way right now. And we're at home and we're just figuring out what all this means. But thank goodness we have Thursday Night Live to really decompress. Because honestly, I've been like, you know, I talked to my roommate and I'm so grateful for her, but like also just being able to talk to people who just care about, you know, hearing me care about these things like that. I don't know, it feels like it's something to be grateful for. Anyway.
Yeah. And I think that even just this conversation shows how dynamic and exciting, like being a badass bystander can be, right? It doesn't have to be like the things that we often talk about in training, right? Like identify this situation, think about how you're going to respond, have this response, right? But it's part of our daily lives. It's not just in certain situations. It's everywhere. It's where we're engaging right now so much in the world of social media and the internet. It's how we engage with the artists that we like and the things that they do that we like and don't like. And it's so many things, and it's just part of our lives and how we live our values. I just find that so exhilarating, you know, like to be able to say, wow, this is how I can live my life. It doesn't have to be I engage in these interventions. You know what I mean? And since we're running short on time, there were a couple of things that we wanted to make sure that we shared with folks with regard to mental health, especially in social media kinds of platforms. Sometimes we'll see and hear things that folks are posting that make us concerned for their well-being. And first of all, to make sure that if we know that person, or perhaps even if we don't know that person, to do a reach out to say, hey, I noticed this. I care, are you okay? And then also to know that platforms like Facebook and Instagram actually have systems in place. They've got some, fancy computer things that are looking for certain kinds of words to try to identify folks who might be in danger with regard to suicide. And then also if we say, hey, this person did this, then those platforms actually will reach out to those folks to offer resources and support. So I want to make sure we give a shout out around that. We had really been hoping to be able to have a nuanced conversation about call out versus call in. And so I agree, Isa, we should have something else that we do to really dig into those things. As we come to the last moment or two of our program, I want to remind people of the programs that Anna was talking about next Tuesday for how to support a survivor. We've got mindful stress management every Wednesday at 4 p.m. You can find the link just below where you clicked on going live with us on Facebook. So you can find all the links to our programs and our schedule of events. And as always, thinking about social media, making sure that you're curating what you're exposing yourself to through social media to maintain your own well-being, choosing what you look at and listen to, and hoping that our social media and CCASA's social media might be places actually of nurturance and support. So hope that you'll continue to follow us. And if we can give a huge shout of thank you to Maria for joining us today, and look for us in other places. We're excited.